a little bit of a preacher in me, but I'm not going to preach, I hope. I was very proud when this book was published a year and a half ago in New York. I'm proud when you have the first copy in your hand and when you can give it to your friends and family. And then the moment comes that other publications are writing about you. There's a book review. There was one in the Wall Street Journal and in the Washington Post and in the Economist and in the Financial Times. And the Financial Times had a remarkable review. It said, this is a book that reads like an inspiring TED Talk. So that doesn't mean, don't be worried, I'm not going to read the book here for you, but I want to take you back to the origin of the storyline of the book and how it evolved into a conclusion that the competitive advantage of Western companies is shifting from cheap to smart. It's a really paradigm shift. It all started, for me, about 15 years ago. I first met Gerard Kleijsterlee. He was just appointed CEO of Philips Electronic, a Dutch company, a multinational. And I was editor-in-chief of Het Financieele Dagblad. That's the leading Dutch financial newspaper. And we sat over lunch and we talked about a surprising decision Philips had taken. It had decided to transform the character of its very famous research lab in Eindhoven, in a small village, a small town, city, in the south of the Netherlands. And that the board of Philips voted for an investment plan of 500 million euros to open up this world-famous research lab. It was a very closed and siloed institute. And surprisingly, they also intended to invite other companies, even competitors, to bring part of their research to that open campus. So I was surprised. And I asked Gerard, why did the board take this unprecedented and bold decision? And he had a simple answer. He said, the technology that is required to solve the wicked problems of this century, aging population, better healthcare, new forms of mobility, new forms of sustainability, clean energy. You need this technology, but the technology is too complex and too expensive to pursue it on your own. There is no single company that can turn this technology in commercial products. So you have to collaborate. In 2006, after a decade of being an editor-in-chief, I decided to step down. And I wanted to go back to writing again, to be a feature journalist. And my first assignment was to write a series of in-depth articles on the fast-growing economies. In those days, there was a very dim view among policymakers and business leaders in Europe about the future prospects. This was the time that the people who were thinking in terms of the glass is half empty were dominant. So my task, the most exciting thing were happening in the emerging markets. And so the question to me was, can you find out what makes those countries tick? So as I set out on a world tour, traveled the globe, and it's exciting to leave your biotope, if you have been so long in the Netherlands, and go to the world and feel the energy in all those countries that are fast-growing economies. You feel the energy that reminded me of the 1950s. Those were the years I was growing up in the Netherlands, and there was a lot of activity in Amsterdam, where I grew up, because it was a post-war period, and there was much rebuilding. And so I spoke in those countries. I visited a couple, like South Korea, Indonesia, Mexico, Turkey, and I met business people, sociologists, policymakers, and economists and bankers. And they all explained to me what the drivers behind that rapid growth was. And that was very interesting. But what surprised me, that was that they were talking also about the limits of their growth. And that they were worried about the innovation process that was needed to change and adapt their product portfolio in the nearby future. And the more I traveled, the more I heard this story. And the more convinced I became that the European companies that were so gloomy were sitting on a huge asset, their decade-long tradition in research and development. So I decided to change my research from the emerging countries to Europe. And I met dozens of researchers, chief technology officers, and they all told me two things. That technology had the potential to solve the wicked problems of this time, of this century, but also that the scientific advances in biology and chemistry and physics was making the research and development for companies more complex. And they all came to the conclusion that you had to collaborate. You had to collaborate across disciplines and between organizations. And especially academia, where basic research is done, and profit-making companies that have a tradition in developing new applications, they had to collaborate. It was the second time that I heard, first from Gerard Kleisterlee and now from the engineers and the chief technology officers, that there was a need for collaboration. In 2013, I met Antoine van Agtmael, my co-author. And he's a Dutchman, but he lives in the United States for over 50 years. He graduated at Yale University when he was a young boy, and he stayed in the United States. He became a banker, and his employer, Bankers Trust, asked him to go to Southeast Asia, to Bangkok, to set up a branch. But after a couple of years, the World Bank invited him to come to Washington and to join the World Bank. And he did. And he was, in that period of time, the man who coined the term emerging markets, because he saw the potential from what was going on in those countries. And he has written a couple of books about it. And so it was funny to meet him, because he had been traveling Latin America and Asia. And in 1987, he founded his own company, an investment fund. And he saw the potential in those continents of the companies who grew very fast, but had a need for risk capital. So he was becoming an investor. And after 25 years, he sold his company. And he made a trip to Latin America and Asia to say goodbye to his clients. And he was surprised, because for the first time in 30 years, he heard people complaining about the competitive heat they felt from Western companies, especially in the field of research and development. So that was the third sign we got that there is something going on in Western companies with research and development. So we Skyped, and we met in person in Washington, where Antoine lives. And we talked about what was going on, and we were very excited. We were like two young boys sitting in his study and talking about what we heard. And we were both thinking, is this glass is half full thinking? Is that rubbish? Or is there a potential nobody sees and we only see? Is manufacturing coming back? Will it end outsourcing of manufacturing? And is joint research between companies and universities, is that a new trend? And we didn't have the answers. We didn't have the answers. So we set out to make a journey, to go out to regions in the United States and in Europe, and just ask people what's going on and how they change their formats, if they are changing their formats. And after 2 years of research and interviews, we came to the conclusion that there is a paradigm shift. There is really something going on. And I've been now many times in the United States, so I picked up some ideas of them. And one of those ideas is bumper stickers. In the United States, if you have something to say, you use a bumper sticker. And what we experienced in our research can be brought back to 4 bumper stickers. From cheap to smart, from rust belt to brain belt, from top down to bottom up, and from vertical to horizontal. From cheap to smart. For many decades, Western companies believed that the competitive advantage was mainly cost. Making things as cheap as possible was their mantra. And if you couldn't do it cheaper in your own home base, you outsourced it. You brought it to countries where the wages were lower. But what we experienced, what we found, was that the heat of the argument of cost, of making things as cheap as possible, became less and less. And that we saw that there was a transformation going on, and that smart was becoming more and more the competitive advantage. And this smart is based on 2 pillars. The first pillar is collaboration. I just mentioned it, but collaboration between universities, academic hospitals, and companies. And that is not exceptional anymore. It's more and more a trend. The second pillar is smart manufacturing. And smart manufacturing is based on robotics, big data, machine learning, new materials, sensors, big data, artificial intelligence. This is not the future, it's happening now. Production processes are fundamentally changed by these new ingredients. So, the decades to come, this will more and more grow in importance. The second bumper sticker is from rust belt into brain belts. And what we did when we went to Europe and to the United States was to select regions that had a rich manufacturing history. And all those regions had a very bad time behind it because manufacturing was outsourced. And what stayed behind were the universities and the research departments of the legacy companies. And what you see in those rust belts, in those regions, that there were people who were thinking in terms of the glass is half full. We call those people connectors, people who can turn a liability into an asset, who can do that by creating an ambitious and hopeful vision, a dot on a horizon that invites people from different disciplines and from different organizations to collaborate. And that's what happened in those rust belts. There were connectors who were ambitious, who were acting with a drive, and who wouldn't give up. And so it was what we saw in Oulu in Finland, in Dresden in Germany, in Akron, Ohio, Albany, upstate New York, Eindhoven in the Netherlands. All those places turned themselves from a rust belt into a brain belt because the sharing of brain power gave us the idea that talking about rust belts is so negative, let's turn it to a brain belt. We didn't do the transformation, people did it. The SIRT is from bottom up, from top down to bottom up, and who are involved in this transformation. And it used to be that, especially in Europe, economic policies in the 70s and 80s were formed through the central authorities. And those central authorities set the economic policy, made the funds available, and everybody was waiting. And what we noticed, what we observed, is that local authorities and local universities and local businesses are not waiting anymore for central governments to formulate that economic policy. They see the potential by putting that dot on the horizon and collaborate. The fourth bumper sticker is from vertical to horizontal. The past decade, the Western society, business, universities, the society at large is organized in vertical silos. And that is very efficient, and that has worked for a long time. But if you want to collaborate, if you want to make new things, smart things, then you feel the restraints of those verticals. And you want to break out. And you are in need for a horizontal structure that is a common place wherein you feel safe to meet other people, other interests, other disciplines, other institutions. And that is easily said, but hard done. It's a long process. It's not a project. Building a horizontal structure is not something you do with paper and pencil, sitting in your own office behind your desk, and you write it down what should be done. It is more a process. It is a process in which people try to find where the new possibilities lie. And that takes time and perseverance. And if you are in a process of a transformation, then I wish you, of course, a lot of success and inspiration. But only through that collaboration can we solve the wicked problems of this century. And by building new horizontal structures, it's the best way to the best solutions. Thank you so much.